Welcome to Module 2, Part 1. So in this module, we're going to go through the impact of your reality filter so you can really understand the why behind the importance of really working on this. And you can see how it actually spells itself out in all different areas of your life. And then we're going to go through a little bit of how to do a core sweep of our beliefs and learn the first few steps of belief repatterning. So what is the impact of our filter? So first and foremost, we discussed in previous modules that all of our emotions are basically creating our actions. So all of our actions are basically emotionally based at their tipping point, and neuroscience has proven this. Actually, a neuroscientist by the name of Antonio Damasio came up with this. All of our decisions are basically made on emotions. And even at the most logical, rational person's point of view, we are still making emotionally based decisions at the tipping point, and then again, we're just quick to rationalize or justify through logic. So obviously, as a result of this, a lot of our procrastination comes from our belief patterning that's existing at the subconscious level, whether we are self-sabotaging or not. And something I'll get into later is that there's actually no such thing as self-sabotage. All self-sabotage is just a subconscious strategy to get a different set of needs met that you're not consciously aware of. And we're going to go into like how to pull that all out and understand it. Addiction is a huge impact of this. Like so many of us who have experienced addiction to whether it's television or alcohol or food or just bad habits in general, and our conscious mind is like, no, we really want to stop this and we're trying so hard. The reason you're stuck is because your subconscious has a different set of rules that it's following, and I'm going to teach you how to actually go in and find these things today. Depression, of course, is impacted by this because we've got the neurochemical reactions that are the result of your beliefs and thoughts and emotions. Anxiety, any form of eating disorders, self-harming, all kinds of different programs here are the result of these sorts of experiences. So your reality filter is impacting your relationships, your career, your relationship to money. They're impacting your health and the healthy habits you take or don't take in your life, your family relationships, your emotions, your mood, and any personality disorders that people are experiencing are largely just a whole bunch of negative programs that are existing at the subconscious level. So your neurochemical responses are also largely impacting if you are in your sympathetic nervous system or parasympathetic. And when we're in sympathetic, this is like our fight or flight response nervous system. When we're in our parasympathetic, it's like rest and digest. And so what happens is if we're spending too much time in our sympathetic nervous system, we're not actually getting the opportunity for our body to heal itself. A lot of research shows, and Dr. Bruce Lipton has a whole bunch of research about this, where we cannot be in a space where our body and our immune function are properly repairing themselves when we are in sympathetic nervous system mode, when we're in that fight or flight state. And a lot of individuals who are struggling with anxiety, depression, all sorts of things, especially the anxiety-ridden individuals, they're basically in a state of fight or flight almost all the time. It's like this chronic state of fight or flight, and we have to learn how to like regulate our nervous system function through our belief pattern reprogramming, through changing our thoughts, through learning how to equilibrate our emotional state. And again, we'll go into this today. And somebody else's work who I really admire and really enjoy following is Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he talks about how literally our genes are like Christmas tree lights. They actually turn on and off in real time in response to the environment that you're taking part of, that you're exposed to. And so, you know, I had somebody say to me a long time ago that genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger. And this is not true. It's your perception of the environment that pulls the trigger. Remember, it's like that stimulus perception response. And when we're not in charge of that filter of our perception, it literally is impacting our gene expression indirectly. And epigenetics has a lot of really interesting research about this that I won't go into in this course, but if you're interested, it's just about gene regulation based on the interaction with your environment. So what is our perception made of? Just to be clear. So we have our stimulus, we have our perception, our perceptual filter, and then we have our response. Going back out through that filter again, our perception is basically the stored belief patterns, thought patterns, emotional patterns, and subconscious coping mechanisms that are taking place with or without our own awareness throughout the course of our day. Our needs are also in there. We have a lot of subconscious needs, and we'll go into this through this course as well. When we don't know what these things are running us instead of us being in charge of our own executive functioning. So we have to know our reality filter in order to optimize our life, in order to heal, and in order to achieve the things that we want to. And another thing that I'll tell individuals that I work with a lot is that if your reality filter is functioning on autopilot, if your subconscious mind is just running on autopilot all the time, then it's almost like mom and dad are still running your brain. It's almost like, all the negative programs you picked up really early are still in charge of you instead of you being in charge of that. And what you'll actually see is that we tend to treat ourselves and our needs very similarly to the way that we perceived our environment treated us and our needs. So we'll tend to speak to ourselves in our own internal dialogue very similarly to how mom and dad spoke to us. If mom or dad were super critical, we tend to be our own worst critics growing up as well. If we found that our needs were dismissed a lot, we tend to be quite dismissive of our own needs going into our adult lives. And the reason for all of these different things is because, again, your subconscious mind is programmed through repetition plus emotion. So whatever you are repeatedly exposed to becomes its own programming. And it's up to your conscious mind to start learning these things, having these awarenesses so that you can use your conscious to reprogram your own subconscious and start creating new habits and a new experience to sort of clean out that reality filter. I like to think of our reality filter as like our windshield through life. Like if you're driving a car around and you start gathering all this mud, all these splotches on your windshield, it starts to muddy the way you see the world. It impacts how you're going to drive around. It impacts your visibility to actually see what's going on. And of course, it impacts just the way that you're driving, how good of a driver you are through your life. So we really have to go in and find out how to isolate these stains on our windshield, or sort of stains in our own personal perceptual filter, so we can clean these things out and live to the highest expression of our potential. Welcome to Module 2, Part 2. This is where we're going to go through a little recap about your reality filter itself, some really key points of learning that you'll need for the entire rest of this course about the subconscious mind, and your first exercise to start finding out what your reality filter is made up of. So, first and foremost, the key points you want to know is that your reality filter tends to be more negative than positive by nature. There's a statistic that says that roughly 75% of our beliefs are negatively oriented, while 25% are positive and or neutral. So think of that for a moment. It's like you're going to have so many more negative things running your life. And the positive and or neutral, the neutral things are like, I believe this is a remote. I believe this is a clicker. Like, these are our neutral beliefs. Or I believe a water bottle is a water bottle. So if we have a lot more of our beliefs negatively oriented, of course that impacts our emotional state over time. And we really want to get clear on what these things are and work through them so we can be in charge of our state. So more negative than positive by nature. And also remember, this is because your brain is very survival oriented. It's going to give more emotional weight to the negatives and the positives, so it can protect you from all the negative things that could come up. Our reality filter is always reprojecting itself. We tend to repeat past experiences over and over again, even though our external reality is changing. So I'm going to give you a really cool example of this. I see a lot of people who might feel lonely all the time, and they might experience the emotion of loneliness all the time, and it can be such an intrinsic part of their emotional patterning. And yet, there can be other people who don't even really feel the emotion of loneliness. They'll say things to me like, I don't even remember the last time I felt lonely. And yet, they might be experiencing the emotion of trapped or powerless very often. And so we all have our own individual emotional patterns that we're also experiencing. And the crazy thing is, even though our external reality seems to be changing throughout the course of our lives, so much of our internal reality is often repeating itself over and over again on autopilot. So let me give you a few examples of this. Number one, there's a statistic that says we think roughly 60 to 70,000 thoughts per day, and roughly 50,000 of them are just repeated thoughts from the day before, which tells you again just how much your subconscious mind is running the show. We also know that roughly 95 to 97% of our behavior is basically subconscious or unconscious, and 3 to 5% of our emotions and feelings and thoughts and beliefs are conscious. So our subconscious mind is responsible for so much, and our conscious mind for very, very little. You'll often see the iceberg diagram that Freud put together, where there's like the tip of the iceberg being the conscious mind, and what's beneath the water being your sub and unconscious mind. And so we tend to be repeating past experiences over and over again, internally specifically. So for example, you might be experiencing a lot of beliefs like I am not good enough, and you might feel emotions like I am trapped and helpless and powerless. And even though your external environment can change, maybe you felt like that in your home growing up, and then you went and you lived in another country or moved somewhere far away, you can still be feeling those same beliefs being activated, those same emotional responses being activated, those same thought patterns, and yet we tend to not notice this because we've been conditioned to be so focused on our external environment over our internal environment. And so you might have felt at home trapped and helpless, and then going into your adult life, you might have felt trapped and helpless in relationships and at work and feeling not good enough in all these different places as well, not realizing that it may not be those things, it might be your internal reality that's being created. And keep this in mind as well. Remember, your subconscious mind always wants to maintain its comfort zone. So it will in fact work to actually create these things when your conscious mind isn't paying attention. And so again, we really want to go in and dive in and find out what these individual things are for us. Another thing that you want to notice about your reality filter is that your internal dialogue tends to become more active around your core wounds or your core negative beliefs. So for example, you might have a pretty still mind when you're on your own and you're just having a peaceful evening at home. But then if you have a lot of negative beliefs about people liking you or your likability, and you go to a networking party full of people, you'll notice that your internal chatter becomes a lot more active. And it sort of speeds up and it becomes more intense, and the emotional responses become elicited more and more. So it's a cool way of sort of tracking where you might feel wounded, is how erratic or how busy your mind becomes. It's always going to be redirecting you to what negative belief patterns exist at the subconscious level. And your internal dialogue is spending a lot of the time throughout your day trying to just meet subconscious needs and tell you what they are, and it's passing through sort of the filter of your beliefs. So it's sort of letting you know that you're trying to avoid or overcome core wounds all day long if you pay attention. So let's just use an example. Let's say you believe that you're not good enough. You might spend a lot of your time throughout the day thinking of how you can be better, or trying to overcompensate for that. I should do this. I should grow in this direction. I have to do it this way. Or you might spend a lot of time judging yourself in your mind all day, thinking negative thoughts about how you're not good enough, or even judging others as a means to try to equilibrate from that core wound that's coming up. So really key points that I'm going to recap on so far, and then some really key points about the subconscious mind I want you to remember and take notes of and have as a forefront in this course itself. Number one, Amy, or all of us really, because Amy's just the symbol for all of us as individuals, she's picking up interpretations about her environment, and these interpretations have much more of an impact on her or on us when we have them over the actual environment itself. In fact, there was a study done at UCLA that said roughly 90% of our experience of our life is based on our subjective interpretation of our experiences as opposed to the experience itself. Classical conditioning basically is a punishment reward system, and it creates all these stored beliefs. Remember, our brain makes all those emotional inferences and stores them. Our beliefs create those thoughts and emotions and actions, the BT equation, and sort of the reality filter of all these different, of how we see the world. And I want you to know as well that a lot of people will come to me and say things like, I haven't been through very much, or I haven't been through so much trauma. Number one, and this is a quote from Dr. Gabor Mate, and it's one of my favorite quotes. He says, trauma is the things that happen to us that shouldn't have happened. So yes, like violence in the household, or screaming, or being, hurt physically, or abused in some way, emotionally, mentally. And also the things that didn't happen to us that should have. So these can be things that fly way underneath the radar. These can be things like emotional neglect. These can be things like your parents just not knowing how to emotionally validate you, or talk to you about your feelings, or encourage that side of you. This can be so many different things that, again, we may not consciously be aware of, especially if we don't have anything to compare it to. These can easily sit in our awarenesses as just basically unknowns. So we can't avoid trauma. We're all going to go through different traumas, and trauma itself too is just something that our nervous system and subconscious mind can't properly process out and let go of effectively. So our subconscious stores it with all the emotions intact, and then our nervous system basically works to like restructure itself around this trauma. It reorganizes itself around the trauma. So these are the key points that I want you to remember for all of this course about your subconscious mind. Number one, there are three main ways that we get programmed. Remember, the things that are modeled to us. So again, if we see mom and dad fighting all the time in our household, we might go, oh, our subconscious goes, oh, love is about fighting, and this is how we communicate our feelings, and this is the norm for a relationship. What we hear repetitively, so again, that example of if you always hear in your household, there's not enough money, you're probably going to have those same belief patterns that you pick up on, and you're going to be creating some of those reality patterns in your own individual life. And then the things that happen from our firsthand experiences. So the example I'll give to you is if you're bullied a lot in childhood, okay, that would be a firsthand experience. So take a moment and just think about what experiences you have in each of those areas. And I'm going to help you go back in a few minutes and do a belief sweep, like just an inventory, so you can start to find out what negative blockages you have on your filter of reality. Number two, the subconscious is programmed through repetition plus emotion. This is super important when we get into the reprogramming later, so keep this in mind. Number three, remember that your reticular activating system is the filtering system of your mind. It's always working on behalf of your programs. And so, you want to keep in mind there aren't really like idle thoughts. We don't really have like neutral thoughts. Our thoughts are always, to a certain degree, either hardwiring and further our programming, or atrophying the programs and patterns that no longer serve us, and giving us the opportunity to create new programs and new patterns. So our thoughts, when we're thinking these 60, 70,000 thoughts per day, they are not very neutral. We want to start being in charge of what's happening in that area, and I'm going to give you some tools specifically for how. Number four, our brain re-projects. Remember, it keeps projecting its past experiences onto its present environment. So again, if you have this belief that people don't like me, and you go and you're in a room full of people, you are specifically going to be re-projecting those painful beliefs back onto your internal environment. And then how do you think you act around people? You probably withdraw, or you isolate, or you're not very friendly, or you're very quiet, or in a protective mode. And it's in that space that you're actually going to keep reinforcing that programming. Because guess what? You're going to go around a whole bunch of people, project those thoughts, act that way, and that's not going to help you meet people further and connect to more people. That's going to make you leave that event or room full of people and go, see, people don't like me, people aren't friendly to me. So often our beliefs, and this is really important, become self-fulfilling prophecies over time. Point number five, your brain, your subconscious mind wants familiarity. You'll hear me refer again a lot to our subconscious comfort zone, because it goes, hey, we survived, so these things are working. And so it keeps working on behalf of them. Number six, our brain focuses more on our negative parts of negative experiences than positive. It gives more emotional weight there. Remember, for survival, like that example I gave you of the car, you'll remember the one negative experience in the car instead of the thousands of positive experiences or safe experiences you had. And lastly, your beliefs and thoughts are running all day on autopilot. Okay, so they're trying to maintain this internal reality. Your subconscious is trying to keep everything the same, which means that things don't tend to get better over time. Your beliefs tend to get hardwired more deeply, and they tend to become more magnified over time. So if you felt a little bit unsafe when you were young, you're probably going to feel very unsafe in your adult years. So this is why it's so important to start creating change. So right now, what I want you to do is take out your workbook, and what you'll see is that there's a a little diagram with the 7 areas of life. And I want you to go through each of those areas. And this is one of the first ways that you can start finding out what your core limiting beliefs are. So I want you to pick up the workbook, go through, and you'll see the different areas: career, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, social, and relational. And I want you to just take inventory of a goal that you have in each area. So let's say, for example, under physical, let's say your goal is to go to the gym more often. And then I want you to ask yourself, after you've set each of these goals, why you're not doing this already. And whatever your but is for this is going to be what limiting belief you have in that area. So for example, if it's, I want to go to the gym more often, and then you go, but I don't have enough time. Well, there's a good example of a limiting belief. So that's your first way of doing a sweep from the 7 areas of your life. So do that sweep, set a goal in each area, ask yourself, why haven't I already achieved this? And you'll start plucking out your first series of limiting beliefs. Now, once you finish that exercise, the next thing I want you to do is take inventory of all of your stories. So all of the limiting stories that you have around the following. You'll see this in your workbook. I'm going to ask you to do your stories about men, about women. Okay, so examples here might be like, women can't be trusted. Men lie too often. Men are unsafe. Go through relationships, marriage, commitment. You'll see that there's almost 20 different spaces. I'm asking you to just pluck out any limiting stories you have. And I don't want you to make this like a one-time thing. I want you to really spend time sort of thinking about this in your everyday experiences. So when you're around men, when you're around women, when you're in relationships, when you're with your partner, these types of things that are happening, when you're in the workplace, in your career, when you're having these experiences, when you're exposed to these environments, notice what types of thoughts you tend to think, what types of fears you tend to have, what comes up for you, what you're emotionally responding to. All of these things are giving you feedback about your beliefs themselves. So go through and do a sweep of any limiting or negative stories you have about all of those. I suggest spending like 10, 15, 20 minutes on it. And then as you enter into your life, try to keep this in mind for the next few days. Try to sort of notice all the things that are coming up for you in these areas. And lastly, I want you to go into your belief sweep, and I want you to take a really long look at what these beliefs actually cost you. Because our subconscious mind likes to keep this idea that these things are protecting us or they're serving us in some way. And I want to give you an example of a friend of mine to help illustrate this example. I have a friend who I've grown up with for a long time, and she had some really painful experiences around men growing up, and she isn't super open to personal growth or personal development work. So her and I went for lunch a few months ago, and a man came over and opened the door and held it for her. And she looked at me and she was like, "Oh, disgusting." And she was literally so seeing her reality through a filter of the past. This nice man who was seriously just opening the door and being kind and just trying to hold it and be polite, she couldn't help but project that he wanted something from her, or he was trying to take advantage of her in some way just by opening the door. And we might think, or we might have sort of been tricked into believing that these subconscious beliefs are protecting us from being hurt. But I want you to think of yourself in that situation and ask yourself, what hurts more? To go your entire life never fully opening yourself and trusting and loving, or to open yourself to these beautiful experiences, have them, and then maybe somewhere along the way something tough or challenging happens, but you learn and you grow from that opportunity and experience. And so as you go through your beliefs, you really want to weigh in on what the cost is of these things that you're carrying in your filter of reality, and ask yourself, what's worse, to keep this belief forever and avoid all experiences and things that could come with trying to break down this belief, or to be free from this belief and actually start living? Hi guys, welcome to our workbook module. We're very excited about taking you through these exercises together. So we're about to go through the Master Your Emotional State and Reprogram Subconscious Beliefs workbook. And I'm going to guide you through the exercises, do some of them firsthand based on either personal examples or examples of clients that I've worked with in the past, and this should really help you to do the work. And I would say out of anything in the school, two of the most important things you're going to take away are doing the actual exercises, number one, and number two, attending the webinars, because these are the two places that you get all of this information, but you get the opportunity to integrate it through seeing real life examples, through doing the real life examples in the work with yourself. And the integration of all of this information is the most important part of healing. All the information can give you all the aha moments, but the integration is key. So let's start by going through this together. So pull up your workbook if you haven't already. You can print it off, you can have it up on your sheet, or on your computer, and we are going to start with the first exercise. Now keep in mind at the back, all of your extra resources are available at the back of your workbook. So in exercise number one, the purpose of this exercise is to create intentions for each of the 7 areas of your life and make conscious the limiting beliefs that exist in each of these areas. It's when information becomes conscious that we have the ability to really break through and create changes. So what we're going to start by doing is going through the 7 areas of life and just set one goal in a single sentence for each of the 7 areas. Try to define the goal as clearly as possible. And you can ask yourself, what would I want to create if I knew anything was possible and success is guaranteed? Because this really helps you to see yourself and to see what you truly desire. Sometimes we stop giving ourselves permission to really dream, and we can cut ourselves off from what we want to create in our lives as a result. So this is your opportunity to get really clear and see into yourself about like what you really want to create if everything was possible. Okay, so career. Remember, get as specific as possible. You might say, want to start a business. I'm filling this out with you. Start a business within 1 year, and you want to get specific. So that's a general goal, and then you would maybe say, start a business in accounting, open an accounting firm, open a yoga studio, whatever it might be. You want to get as specific as possible. And if you want to really add to it, you can say sort of what it looks like, what that would feel like, add sense perceptions to the experience. I wake up every day feeling inspired, feeling energetic. The more you can sort of add in there, the easier it's going to be to really integrate that goal, because the more visuals we bring in, that's the language of the subconscious mind. The subconscious speaks through emotion, and it speaks through symbols and images. So you're really communicating to yourself that way. So you're going to go through, you're going to do that for every single one. Financial, I want to save X amount of money per month, and I can do this by going to Starbucks less. Like whatever it is, just put something that's really clear in front of you. So you're going to repeat that for all 7 areas. Then you're going to ask yourself, in part 2 of this exercise here, you're going to ask yourself, for each of those 7 areas, what is your but? And your but is basically your personal place of resistance or fear. And this is going to show you your limiting beliefs. So you might say, for example, I want to start a business, but I'm afraid I will fail. Or you might say, and I'm filling this out with you, I'm afraid I will fail. You might say as well, financial. I want to save more money and create a budget, but I don't have enough time. And so this is showing you the limiting beliefs that you're carrying about yourself in each of the 7 areas of life. And it's a really good way of just identifying these core perceptual blocks, essentially, at a subconscious level. So that's exercise 1. And this is just sort of introspective work, getting you really clear, helping you see into your own subconscious mind a little bit better. Now, exercise 2, we're basically extending this. We're really trying to get clear, not just in the 7 areas of our lives, but the more specific we can get, the better. I always say inside of the school, whenever we're trying to solve a problem, we have to isolate that problem as clearly as possible first. If you think of a doctor, going into surgery, and we say, it's a heart surgery, and somebody says, oh, there's a problem with the heart, that doesn't help very much. But if you say, oh, it's in, the left ventricle of the heart, and then we get to actually know what we're targeting, where to go, and it's going to help us be better problem solvers. And so those same principles and ideas absolutely apply to emotional intelligence. And when we can get really clear about, like, let's say we look at the relationships in our lives, in the 7 areas of life, we look at the relationship center of our goals. Maybe we say the limiting belief is, but I don't have enough time to date. But then maybe you'll find when you look at your stories of men or women that you don't trust. I don't trust men, or I don't trust women. And so it really helps us to take something sort of under an umbrella and really dive more deeply into exactly what the root of the problem is and where these things come from. So the purpose of this exercise is to make the subconscious contents of your mind conscious by investigating what perceptions or emotional associations you have about these fundamental aspects of life or interactions. Emotional perceptions and emotional associations, by the way, are just forms of beliefs. They're just stored emotion that you can convert into thought because of experiences you've had from the past. So, you might have built-in negative emotional associations to men in the form of beliefs that I cannot trust men. You might have built-in fear-based negative associations to women. You might feel fear around women because maybe you think all women are judgmental. Okay, so those are just stored perceptions. Those are basically stories, perceptions, associations. They all sort of fall into the same category. They're all very closely intertwined. So these will exist, like we're saying, at the belief and thought level. For example, I believe women can't be trusted. I believe women are catty, etc. These are some stories I've heard from people very often over the years. And then we're going to, dive into reprogramming these things later in this workbook. So just start, for example, and think of like what some of your feelings are when you're around lots of men or lots of women, or when you're really in a committed relationship. Like, really try to think of the things that come up for you if you imagine yourself back in those contexts, and see what comes up. I fear men will be judgmental. I fear women will be catty. I fear relationships require too much effort. I feel that I lose myself when I'm in relationships because I love in an enmeshed way. I feel all marriages fail. Marriage is too risky nowadays. Too many marriages end in divorce. I feel commitment will keep me trapped or stifled. I feel like I won't get to express who I am. I feel like myself in a relationship, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of love. I always get abandoned, So get really clear. These are some really common stories I hear, and I want you to go through in the discovery here and really take a look, okay? And take your time with that exercise. The more information you have in here, the more patterns you notice about yourself, the easier it will be to reprogram these patterns and to navigate your life more effectively. Now we're going to look at exercise 2. And this is part 2. Thought and belief reflection, the impact of your stories on your behavior. So I want you to take a look. If I believe, for example, that men will leave, what is the impact of that story on my behavior? Okay, so the purpose of this exercise is to recognize how these subconscious belief patterns impact your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So what you're trying to look at is start by listing how you tend to behave, okay, how you are, how you show up around each of the above. And this is a deep introspective exercise. Now keep in mind, you don't have to go through letters A to T in the discovery section of exercise 2 in your inventory. You can pick the ones where you have charged stories. So if you have good feelings about marriage, good feelings about commitment, good feelings about vulnerability or parents' marriage, all these different things, you can skip those. you're looking for the ones specific to the areas where you are blocked. Okay? So list how you tend to behave around each of those. And we'll be doing the internal work soon. If you see a pattern you do not like, do not hesitate to create external strategies to work on this. Okay? So remember, we can create behaviors to change, but we can also create reprogramming internal perceptions to change. Both work. And the bigger the issue, the more we want to actually target using both. And that's important work to be doing. So this is going to bring us to the example. So for example, when I believe women are catty or untrustworthy, I become shy and quiet around females in general. I don't open up and I can act cold. And that might be a really clear example of how you find yourself operating, in these situations. Okay? Now, this exercise goes on. Put anything out there in terms of what you notice about your patterns of behavior. And number 2, you want to notice the emotions you feel when you experience these stories. What we're trying to do here is get the entire paradigm that's operating at a subconscious level made conscious, because with awareness, it's so much easier to transform. Once we've isolated a problem, we know clearly what it is, we know all the intricacies and nuances of that problem, we can see it as it's happening. We disidentify, we have the ability to observe, and that's the first set of major steps to transformation. Then we can choose new thoughts with our conscious mind. Then we can choose new patterns of behavior and use exposure work to create transformation. All these things we're going to get into later. We can do the belief reprogramming to knock things out at the root. So we're going to be able to do all of this, but first we need to get really clear about what's happening. So an example of this might be, I feel discomfort, I feel irritation and worry when I'm around women. Okay? What do these stories cost you? I really want you to take a look at what your life would look like without these stories living inside of you. For example, this cost me fulfilling relationships with women, feeling comfortable around females, etc. Maybe this makes me feel lonely on a more regular basis because I block relationships out. Whatever it is, it's your job to really take a good hard look at this information, because the brain is wired to avoid pain and seek pleasure. So when we look at the cost and we start associating pain with the experience, with this painful story or belief we're carrying, suddenly we want to move. It's building your why at the subconscious level. Suddenly we want to move away from this painful thing that we are carrying, which creates more motivation to drop it. Now, what do you make these stories mean about you? And you can refer to the core belief sheet in the back of your workbook. Remember, in the back of your resources, you'll see it there. Example of this might be, I make this mean that I am unsafe when I'm around women. I also make it mean that I don't belong when I'm around women. So you're just looking, just to be really clear here, I believe that women are catty, so that's external. It's about the women. And I make it mean that I am unsafe when I'm around women. So we have an internal belief, which are our core beliefs about ourselves. And then we have external beliefs, which are basically just other belief systems we're carrying. Not necessarily core I am beliefs, but just beliefs we carry in general that are stored in our subconscious mind. Now, this is an excellent exercise to do when you notice yourself feeling unexplained discomfort around people or situations and you are looking to identify and break through a block that might exist in your mind.